go from there.
Great. I think more people would join as we go on, but maybe we want to start on the dot. Is that fine?
That was completely fine with me. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining. Please feel free to submit any questions through the Q&A function. The chat is closed currently. You can find the Q&A function at the pop-up menu at the bottom of your Zoom window. Feel free to ask any questions, and after the 30 minutes, Prof. Nadia would be answering some of them. Before we begin, I would love to introduce Prof. Nadia. Prof. Nadia is a professor of pediatrics in the Division of Pediatric Infectious Diseases at the University of Minnesota Medical School, USA. She has served as the Senior Technical Advisor for Pediatric and Adolescent HIV at the Institute of Human Virology Nigeria, IHVN, since 2010. And she's a Senior Researcher Faculty at IHVN's International Research Center for Excellence. Prof. Nadia's research focuses on the prevention and treatment of HIV, TB, Mpox, and other infectious diseases of public health importance among children and youth in African countries. HIV program implementation experience drives the formulation of research questions for formal evaluation. Prof. Sam is also a member of the Nigeria Implementation Science Alliance, and the NIH Fogati Adolescent HIV Prevention and Treatment Implementation Science Alliance as well, AISA. And she also leads the Central and West Africa Implementation Science Alliance, which has collaborators in Gambia, Ghana, Nigeria, Cameroon, and DR Congo. Professor Nadia has served as a PI on grants awarded by funders such as the World Health Organization, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the US National Institute of Health. Prof. Nadia supports and mentors motivated early career African scientists to pursue academic excellence and to make an impact on health outcomes in Africa. We are super, super honored and lucky to have her with us today, and I'll give her the floor now to begin the session. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you so much for the introduction. I really appreciate the kind introduction. As you may all have heard, I work in several African countries with different collaborators, and I just want to send my well wishes to those in countries that are going through a lot of political turmoil right now, including Cameroon, Tanzania, Kenya, DR Congo, and Nigeria. And to say that, to continue to do research in these types of environments is extremely difficult when you are concerned about your life and the safety of your family. So I really do thank those who are able to make it, but also my well wishes to all of those who are having a difficult time right now. So I'd like to start really right off so that we have enough time for questions. The objectives here are three main objectives. First, I'd like you all to understand the importance and the scope of the NIH approach section in relation to the other research strategy sections and to the overall grant. Second, I'd like to have you be able to describe elements of writing that are critical for the approach section. And then third, to be able to develop an organized system for writing the approach section. In any sort of task, including writing grants, everybody has their style. And so I really urge you all, if you're not already established your own style, to establish your style. But then again, in my own experience, my style is also a component of borrowing from other people's styles that I find very helpful and very useful. And so I start taking a little bit from here, there, and then really put it together. But I would say that a lot of my style or the way I approach things also comes from people who mentored me, who spent time working with me. So I just wanted to put that out there. As you're developing this organized system, you will note that you have a style, but then that style should really get you to the end, which is a well-organized, successful grant. All right, so my outline is just to talk about the content with respect to the three objectives that I've showed, and then also talk about my personal style of grant writing philosophy and my approach to the approach section, with all of these subsections mentioned here, and you'll see them as we go through the presentation. Now, I did a similar talk last year. I've changed it a bit this year, and including because of the fact that there have been changes to NIH review as of January this year. So before, we had 5 main sections that were each scored 1 to 9, 1 being the best and 9 being the worst. So you have significance, innovation, approach, investigator, and environment. Now we have 3 factors. There's factor 1, which represents the importance of the research, under which they've categorized significance and innovation, scored 1 to 9. Then there's factor 2, which represents rigor and feasibility of the proposal, which is really reflecting what we are talking about today, which is approach. That's also scored 1 to 9. And then we have factor 3, expertise and resources, under which come information related to the investigators and the environment that is supporting the research on the environment in which they're doing the research. And this is to be evaluated as either sufficient or not sufficient for the proposed research. So that factor 3 does not attract an actual score. It's just a qualitative evaluation of sufficient or not sufficient. And so noting again that we have 3 factors, the first 2 factors are scored, the third part is not scored. It is just given as sufficient or not sufficient. All right, so note here that approach is the largest section of the NIH research strategy section. That's really the meat of the proposal. And so I made a table here to show, first of all, the NIH sections or the scored sections, what is expected of you for that section, where in the application is that section, and how much of the application does it take, and then how many NIH pages. And I have to tell you that writing grants works well for people who are extremely detail-oriented and to some extent anal about things, or have a little bit of, some people would joke, obsessive compulsiveness, because they really do scrutinize your grant in terms of the review. In fact, from the time you submit, there are people who are going to check to make sure the formatting is correct before it's even sent to reviewers. So you have to get everything lined up. And so if you're someone who's not used to being attentive to detail, you're going to have problems here. So make sure you work with people who understand this, and that you start sort of engineering your thinking and the way you do things to be highly detail-oriented and organized. So factor 1, again, under that is significance and innovation. You want to talk about the why. This problem is important. Here's some data that will tell you why. And this is your conversation with the reviewer. Innovation is the idea. We have a cool or novel or comprehensive way or ways to scientifically and rigorously address the problem. The factor 2 now is approach, right? Where you're going to show rigor and feasibility. Here is a detailed step-by-step recipe we have developed to solve the problem. And then factor 3, the expertise and resources. You talk about the who. Who is going to be doing the research, and what is the relevant training, expertise, and experience that they have. And then the other section of this, the resources, is the places and things. What are the well-equipped places that the investigators, where the investigators will conduct the study, and what are the things they have at their disposal to enable them to successfully conduct it? In terms of where in the application, of course, significance and innovation, that is factor 1, are in your research strategy, also known as research plan. And these are percentages that, these are not NIH percentages of how much it should be. These are, in my own experience, how much space these sections will take or should take in your proposal. And noting that in the factor 3, expertise and resources, there's really no page limits, but you have to be succinct, and this will include 5-page biosketches for your investigators. But then again, back to this place, how many NIH pages? An NIH page is single-spaced, narrow margin, which translates to 1/2 inch. And these are the fonts that NIH recommends that you use. You can't cheat by using a tiny font to fit everything in there. There's a particular font you've got to use. And all of your page limitations include any photos, tables, or figures you intend to use in the research plan. I'll give you an example. If you're writing what is called an R01 or U01 grant, it is 12 NIH pages for the research plan. And then an R21 or R03 type grant has 6 NIH pages. So every category of NIH grant has the page limitations for the research plan. Every time someone says 12 or 6 or whatnot, we are talking about the research plan, the main part. It doesn't count all the other pages. So an NIH application can have 100 pages, 200 pages. I've reviewed NIH grants that have 1,000 pages. Those are huge, huge, huge grants. So take note of your page limitations as well. No point in writing a great approach section and then you don't pay attention to the page limitations and other sections and your grant gets rejected. All right, so the approach section is your how section, is your recipe, and reviewers will scrutinize your approach and will want to know, what does this person or what do you plan to do? What does this team plan to do? How do they plan to do it? And can they do it? So in the end, you have to convince them of all three for you to be successful in your grant application. So here are some things that NIH specifies that you think about when you're writing the approach section. Are the overall strategy, methodology, and analysis well-reasoned and appropriate to accomplish your specific aims? Have you, the investigators, presented strategies to ensure a robust and unbiased approach as appropriate for the work proposed? Have you addressed potential problems, alternative strategies, benchmarks for success? If the project you are proposing is in early stages, will your approach or your strategy establish feasibility, and will you manage risky aspects? And if the approach is clinical research, what are the plans for things like protection of human subjects, inclusion of minorities and members of different sexes or genders, as well as inclusion of children? And how are they justified in terms of your scientific goals and research strategy? You have to lay all of that out. Now, this is not the face you want for your reviewer when they are reading your grant. And sometimes in reviewing grants, sometimes that's what my face looks like. Sometimes that's what my fellow reviewers' faces look like. You are reading it and you're like, these people are unprepared. These people are not serious. These people should have put more time into writing this. But this is the face you want for your reviewer when they are reviewing your grant. Men, they are well organized. Men, they have put their points out together. Men, they have used illustrations. I understand what they are trying to do. And now I'm a champion for this grant. That's what you want. So how do we do that? And I'll present that with some of my own grant writing philosophy. I think of it as a recipe for a dish. Okay. I also I'm someone who does a lot of sort of cooking and making meals and putting up recipes and things like that. And it's actually a very kind of exacting process if you think about it, especially for baking. And baking is chemistry. You put the wrong amount of baking soda or baking powder in or yeast, and it's a failure. So it's like writing a recipe for a dish or developing code for a computer program. If you don't write it well, whoever uses your recipe or code will be confused. They won't understand your vision for the work that you are proposing. So step by step, every single ingredient is listed and the directions of how you intend to use it, how much of it, what time, and how long it will cook or how long the process is going to take. Detailed but clear and brief. Detail doesn't mean a whole jumble of things. You still have to be organized. So an excellent recipe will help others to realize an excellent dish. A well-written code will give you an error-free program, and a well-written grant is a convincing grant, and that's what you want to write. Convincing grant that puts the reviewer brings the reviewer onto your side and makes them a champion for your grant. So in terms of breaking down the NIH approach section, your sections, your subsections, and then there's a source that holds all of it together. Detail, clarity, and organized fashion. Explain your approach for design and contact. What you're trying to do is convince a group of experts to give you thousands or millions of dollars or whatever currency it is you're looking for. So why should they give you the grants if what you're writing is not even organized? Why should I give you $1,000, $100,000 as a reviewer? or $1 million. If you can't organize the proposal you're writing, it's not convincing. So while you are not in the room with them, so you can't verbally defend your proposal. This is not like defending your PhD. You are not there in the room with them. You can't explain the things you missed. You can't answer the questions right away. So your writing should be sufficient to explain your approach, because you have no other chance to explain your approach. Everything is on paper. And your strategic use of tables, you should have a strategic use of tables and illustrations to break up the monotony of pages and pages of text. And I'll tell you this, as an NIH reviewer, you can look at pages and pages and pages and pages of text. It becomes monotonous and boring. And sometimes key points that need to be highlighted are buried in the text. And so tables, figures, maps, other illustrations, boxes are very helpful for making your key points and things you want to draw the reviewer's eye to. So you need to use text. And some people think of illustrations as a waste of text space. I'm telling you, those illustrations are probably the ones that's going to save your application, because it attracts people's eyes and people look at the data in there. So while you are writing, still look for opportunities to put in illustrations and tables, because they will help you. They will make your points clear, they make the reading interesting, and they make things flow. So my personal rule is that I shouldn't pass more than 2 pages without having a table or a figure. And please don't make them super tiny. Make them sizable enough for people to see. So that's use of space and keeping white space in there. That is making it easy on the eyes when you read. I'm telling you, because in the end, you don't want the reviewer to be irritated by your formatting that is squeezing everything into the space. You don't want them to strain their eyes. Let it be a pleasant thing for the reviewer to read your proposal, and the majority of it being your approach. So that is really where you can win or lose the grant. So you need to turn your reviewers into advocates. So do not irritate your reviewer. Make it pleasant to read. So you may have talked about specific aims already. That's probably the first thing you are going to draft. And then you have your significance, which along with innovation comes under your factor 1. And then you have your factor 2, which is approach, which is what we are talking about today. So these are the big sections that are relevant to really the aims of the study and the research plan. And then as you are writing all of these sections, think to make sure that all these things are being met for all of these sections. Brevity. Don't say more than you really need to. Don't be verbose. Brevity, clarity, relevance to the topic, relevance to your objectives, relevance to your study setting, and then a logical flow of making your case. And for all of these sections, specific aims, significance, innovation, approach, brevity, clarity, relevance, flow, brevity, clarity, relevance, flow, in all of those sections. You can't do that for one section and leave the other section. So while we are focusing on approach here, I still want to tell you generally that this applies not only to approach, but to the other sections, especially including the specific aims. So writing your grant is writing the recipe. Don't just write, articulate your points. Don't just throw in data, organize and justify. And don't just develop some areas and neglect others. Fully attend to all required areas. And I can tell as a reviewer where people did a great job in one section or subsection, and then you start feeling and seeing the energy draining out of the other sections. And maybe one person, one very experienced or motivated person wrote that section that you see is very good, and then another person wrote another section who maybe didn't have the time or wasn't motivated or invested or didn't have the experience, and you can really tell the difference between the sections. And it's a tragedy, and that's the word I use for some grants that I discussed with reviewers. We're like, they had a good idea, but they didn't articulate it well. And it's a tragedy that we can't fund it, okay? So your grant writing reflects how you will implement. And so if I'm seeing someone doing messy writing, especially in their approach, then I'm like, this person is going to have messy implementation, and we should not give them this grant. So there's one way you see things, people just throw stuff in and hopefully think that hopefully it will stick. So here's an example here. Something that's messy writing. You throw stuff in, let's see what sticks. the writing is confusing, and the entire section is disorganized. Then you can see one where some subsections, like this plate here, well organized, looks nice. But then outside of the plate, things are scattered out on the table. They neglect the rest. But this is what you want. All subsections are well developed, well organized, logically written, neatly presented. That is what you want. So my approach to the NIH section in terms of organizing is I ask myself, okay, how will you conduct the study, which will be your approach, to address the important problem that you identified, which is the significance, with the innovative idea you have described, which is innovation, according to the specific aims that you have outlined. So in terms of labeling and organization, when I look at these subsections, I tend to label significance section A, innovation B, approach C, and then I create subsections that make sense into paragraphs A1, A2, A3, B1, B2, B3, C1, C2, C3. And under those sections, I might have A1.0, A1.1, 1.2, and so on and so forth. And then A2.0, 2.1, 2.2, so that they can find these sections. Word, the Word software has that you can label. I tend to do these by hand myself because of the style in which I want to do it. And Word tends to put indents there, and I don't want to waste that space. So I sort of manually label these sections so that Word doesn't automatically put the indents in. But I guess you could also do it with Word and not factor out the indents. So remembering that there's a new way of NIH review. So again, you have to think about, you have to do your writing to reflect how it's going to be reviewed. So before it was sitting separately significance, innovation, but now significance and innovation come under factor 1, and then approach comes under factor 2. So for factor 2, our approach section, which in a grant that I'm writing, I might label section C. Do the team members have the required training, expertise, and experience? So I do tend to start out in our approach by actually talking about the investigative team, listing the key personnel from the PIs to co-investigators and the consultants. For each personnel, I have 2 to 5 lines of relevant biography and their role on the grant. PI info may be a little longer because those are the people that are leading. Reviewers don't have time to read every single biosketch, and each biosketch is 5 pages. So honestly, this section where they summarize is really helpful because then I, as a reviewer, can quickly see what are they bringing to the table. So you summarize the biosketches in 2 to 5 lines for each person. You might think it's a waste of space. It's not a waste of space, okay? You might need about half to 1 page for this team narrative. So I've put an example here. You can refer to that, okay, of something I actually wrote in a grant for this investigative team section. All right. So then what is the evidence that this team has the experience and expertise on this topic? What data have they generated prior to this that is relevant to this study? So that is called preliminary studies, and that's the amount of pages it can take, depending on your grant allowance. And I've written these page allowances for an R01 type grant, which has 12 pages for the research plan. So the preliminary data in this section should have been generated by members of the research team, because you want to say this is what we have generated prior to this. So it's not a literature review of somebody else's work. It's a section that reflects what you and your team has done. So it could be data that's published in press. If I really don't have it published yet, I might say it's under review or it's a preprint. This is one of the best uses of preprints. When you know you're going to write a grant, there's no time to publish the paper that is part of your preliminary studies. You submit it as a preprint, and then you can cite it in your proposal. You mentioned the team member whose work is cited so that they know that these people are on the team. For example, if it's me, it's Sam or Sam Agudu and colleagues, or results from the ACT study, PI Sam Agudu showed that. Sometimes I will cite some abstracts if I haven't published that data yet, because that's when I know I'm really desperate, but I will cite the abstracts to show that we've done the work, we just haven't published it yet. Ideally, the bulk of your preliminary data should be from the PI's work. They are leading the proposal because they have the most experience and expertise to bring to the table. However, co-investigators contribute further expertise, especially in areas where the PIs are lacking. So if I'm writing a grant, I'm an HIV researcher, I do implementation science, and I know I'm lacking in things like mental health work or social science work or health economics work, I will bring co-investigators with that experience. And I'll cite their relevant studies. Once somebody is on your team, their prior work is now our work. So you can claim it, okay? And the preliminary studies narrative should show that the PIs and the team have laid the foundation for this study and have the expertise and experience to carry it forward. So I'm reminding you, preliminary studies section is not a literature review. It is focused on the research team's work only. And if you realize that you cannot write an adequate preliminary studies section with the team you have, you need to reevaluate the team, because little or no preliminary data tells the reviewers that these people have not done this work before, or if they've done it, it's not published, and if it's not published, it's not done, and can cost you the grant because it doesn't convince the reviewer that you understand the topic and can do the work. And especially, I'll add this, if there's a consortium that has a name that the PIs or co-Is are part of, name it. For instance, I lead the Central and West Africa Implementation Science Alliance, and I'm a member of AfriHealth. Reviewers really love consortia. It shows that people have organized themselves into a group for a certain research mission. And so if you did this work in collaboration with a consortium that has a name, it's great to mention it in your preliminary studies, even as you mention the individual team members who led those papers. So what innovative study do you propose that builds on the preliminary data that you just described? Overview of your study design, summarize what you propose. If you have a conceptual framework, for instance, if you are writing an implementation science proposal, that illustration of your conceptual framework and your study design is important. If I have space, I might repeat the specific aims here. If I don't have space, your specific aims is a whole page. Don't repeat it if you don't have space. Just refer the reviewer to the specific aims page. So here's some narrative of how it can be written. I won't read it all, but just to say, we propose this. This is the design we use for this population, ALHIVs, adolescents with HIV, versus this approach, and so on and so forth. And this is what we are going to measure. Summarize what will happen. So we have 12 randomly selected clinics from a collection of clinics in this particular area, which will serve as study sites, where a total of this many adolescents will be enrolled. Describe what will happen at intervention versus control sites, because there needs to be a clear difference in what is going to happen at intervention versus control sites. This is where a table will be perfect, your follow-up period, and the data to be collected. There's a section that people like to add in NIH grants, and I also think it makes sense, an alternative approach. What are some viable alternatives to the study design, and why did you not choose those? So again, you are justifying what you chose by talking a little bit about alternatives you could have used and why you didn't use them. So study procedures, this is where the detailed recipe comes in. Tell us in detail the who, the what, the when, the where, the why, the how many, and how much. And this is what NIH says. This section, this subsection, study procedures, is a detailed discussion of the way in which the results will be collected, analyzed, and interpreted. Take the reviewer through step-by-step how you implement or achieve each of the specific aims. And so here's an example breakdown of study procedures in the approach section, maybe 2 to 3 pages. See 4.1, 4.2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Study setting and site recruitment, randomization, research and site staff training, including human subjects, participant recruitment, intervention procedures, control procedures. Use tables to summarize and organize the data, and schematics to illustrate other points or activities. Again, my personal style, a table of figure every 2 pages. For such a section, I might have a table of figure on every page, because this is really the key part of the core of the approach section. So study measures and outcomes. What are you going to measure and how are you going to measure it? This is where people can fail miserably. They might have a great methods described up to this point. Then when it comes to the actual measures, they become vague or skip it altogether. You cannot do that. Describe all primary and any other important secondary outcomes and their measures. And I'm showing you this picture so you can have it in your head. Is it half a teaspoon? Is it a quarter of a teaspoon? Is it a full teaspoon? Of what? So here you see in this picture different things and measures and then the content of them. So what are you measuring? What are you using to measure it? And how much are you measuring? So everything you need to measure to achieve your aims must be defined. What do you mean by retention? Because it can mean different things, and put citations for the definitions. If not, then you say, for the purpose of this study, a research team defines retention as, maybe it's your own definition that you may have used before. Write it clearly. And how to objectively measure it must be clear. Aim 1, you give the recipe and directions. Then I go to aim 2, the recipe and directions. Then aim 3, recipe and direction. All of those well organized. A detailed recipe will say you need 3 eggs, a cup of sugar, a teaspoon of baking soda, a cup of margarine, 3 cups of flour. You tell them what to do. Mix them before combining, bake at this particular temperature for 1 hour. This is very detailed. But then sometimes what you see is you need some eggs, sugar, baking soda, margarine, and flour. Mix everything and put in the oven. That's what you are presenting as your grant. And that's why some of these grants are not being funded because it's not detailed enough. The how and how much of every piece of data you collect and analyze to address your specific aim should be described. So the next subsection is your stats analysis plan. You describe what you will do and how you do it. Now describe how you analyze and interpret the results. Organize by aim 1, describe the analysis plan. Aim 2, describe analysis plan. Aim 3, describe analysis plan. That's if you have 3 aims. I'm just using 3 aims as an example. And then under each aim, separate out the quantitative from the qualitative sections. If you have a qualitative data collection as well, or if it's a qualitative study that also has quantitative, meaning you basically have a mixed method study, separate out the quant and qual from each other. And if the quantitative is more important or of more focus than the qualitative, then start with that. If the qualitative is more important or has a more qualitative focus than quantitative, then start with the more important one and then talk about the less important one, but separate them out. Especially for difficult or controversial analyses, justify why you are using one analytical approach versus another. Describe potential difficulties and limitations and how you overcome or mitigate them. How will you deal with missing data? How you deal with other statistical issues. Get the assistance of a statistician, of course, or you can draft it yourself, but you need a statistician with relevant expertise to review it. Honestly, if you are doing a clinical trial, you need to have a statistician who will draft this section, and then you work together because the stats need to make sense to the study. And I'll tell you, do not permanently and completely outsource your stats plan and analysis to a statistician. Even if your statistician writes it, I sit with them, I have them explain, I tell them maybe this might not work for what we want to do. What is an alternative approach? Does this make sense? Can we do this? So you, if I'm assuming here you are the PI, you are the lead investigator, you should be able to discuss and understand statistics for every project. So you don't, I find that too many of us outsource it and then we close the door and say, let them do that. They are doing yourself a disservice. So I have to get to a point where I can argue with a statistician about their plan and to say, no, I think we need to do this. And you have to convince me why we should use this approach versus that. And I understand what they mean by that. And so with each of these projects, I understand more about the stats, but I don't outsource the stats completely. I do not. I make sure that I understand what is being done and that I know enough to be able to argue with a statistician as to what is appropriate. So you also have to have a study visits and timeline section. Incredibly important. Summarize in a table or a Gantt chart how long the proposed study will take and the major time points. The proposed study, for example, you can say the proposed study will occur over a 60-month period with 6 study visits as described below in figure X. Study visits are actually critical time points for collection of primary outcomes and secondary outcomes data, but mostly primary outcomes. The study visits and timeline must be in perfect alignment with what you have described in the study design, in your study procedures and your study measures and outcomes. So if you change something in the design or procedures, make sure you go back and look at your visits and timeline and change them. They must be in perfect alignment. So here's an example from an actual study that we did, where it's showing, from the beginning, what's happening in the first 6 months, the next few months, when does the first visit happen? When does the second visit happen? When does the third visit? And then all these other time points, and describing what is happening at each point. Here I'm showing an example of a Gantt chart. They are indispensable to writing grants, especially your approach section too, because this typically comes at the end of the approach section where you are talking about a timeline for implementation in general. So this is an example of a Gantt chart for a project. It's fairly easy to develop it in Excel. So you have the time, the years and the time points here. Sometimes I write month 1 to 3, month 4 to 6, things like that. Some people write the actual names of the months, that's fine. Because grants are funded, sometimes the time you expect the grant to start does not start, even for the funder. You're supposed to start in October, but the funding doesn't come to December. So I tend to just use generic numbers, month 1 to 3, so that whenever we are funded, the first month is month 1. Okay, then you have different key things that happen. One section here, what is going to happen under that section, phase 1, what are you measuring, what is going to happen there, and then you shade in the time points or the time periods where these things are going to happen. Another thing I do is, instead of phases, I write aim 1, 2, 3. There's some preparation that I write. Then aim 1, key things that are supposed to happen, I put them in. Aim 2, key things. Aim 3, key things, so that the reviewer can come to this and see exactly where my aims are going to happen, where I'm going to do the tasks related to these aims. So that is really it for this short talk. Here are some very helpful references that I used, but I also cited your mentors, your teachers, and published papers in general as your references, because mentoring and teaching this is really the best way, one of the best ways to learn about this. And if someone is mentoring and teaching you to write grants or an approach section, apply and integrate this into doing. Don't just get the mentoring and teaching and not applying. You've got to do it, and you've got to do it yourself. Even if someone gives you an example of a successful grant, don't just copy and paste sections. Read it, listen to how the person is describing it, learn from it, apply it, and then grow in your own skills. You will not grow in your skills if you don't do it yourself. And so the people who tend to do a lot of these things themselves, however painful and time consuming it is, man, you grow your skills and you get to be very good, and you get to be independent, where you can look at a blank sheet of paper and start writing and write a whole grant yourself. There's an academic phrase bank that is basically a collection of terminologies and sentences of how you can introduce different sections and write, because sometimes the vocabulary and the articulation can be difficult. So it's something I've shared already with the organizers that we'll share with you for you to use to help you sort of construct your section. So the best grants have relevant content. They don't write about things that are irrelevant to the point. They are detailed, but they are not overly wordy. They are well organized and formatted. They are clear with logical flow, and they are well illustrated to highlight their points. So I will stop here, and then we can have the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Wow. Thank you so much, Prof. Nadia. That was very, very, very educative. And my jotters is already full, and I'm sure all the participants as well, theirs as well, is full as well. So there are a couple of questions in the Q&A. Do you want me to read them, or do you want to answer them from your end?
So I see the shout out from UCC, University of Cape Coast. Hello. So question is, I'm writing a K43, good, great. Do you advise that the significance comes before innovation section or vice versa? I remember that this grant-a-thon treated innovation before significance. Again, that's a style thing. But every NIH grant I've written has the significance before innovation. So I'll say organize it the way you think makes sense. For me, I have to write the significance of the project and justify it and say, given the significance of the question that I'm asking, here is the cool way I have developed to answer it. So I tend to go from significance to innovation before moving forward. But that's my style. If you flip it the different way and it makes sense to you and you can write it that way to make sense to the reviewer to then do so. Yeah. And then and there's a question from Soraya. Thanks for your time. Excellent talk. When you say to use boxes or illustration or table, can we use colors? Because these reviews for NIH, I don't really print the proposals when I'm reviewing because there are a lot of pages. Some reviewers print, they can decide to print in color or not, but of course, you can use colors. So because most of us, I think, don't print, it's fine to look at it online. You can use colors. This is not like publishing a paper where you might want to put it in grayscale because the journal will not publish it or they'll charge you extra. Use colors to your advantage, but I don't overuse them. I usually have a set of 3-4 colors I might use for different things, and the way I format my table is exactly the same all throughout. But for example, if you have a map, and you want to show different regions, you've got to use colors to show that. So please do use colors, but I tend to use gentle pastel type colors and not bright colors. I think these things through down to the T. Okay, so I use sort of gentle on the eyes colors as well. But yes, definitely use colors, they're helpful. So some grant rules stipulate that there should be no figures or tables. It should consist of text only. Oh yes, that is some grants. NIH doesn't, last I checked, doesn't disallow you from using them. But there are some grants that will say that they don't want any figures or tables. Those are some of those grants where you enter the grant information in a portal online and they don't really work well for putting figures or tables, or you will attach them later. And that's fine. If that's their rules, that's their rules. But NIH, you are free to use any and all of those as far as you think that they are important to. So, but in such cases, if the grant says you shouldn't use any, then you shouldn't, because that's the easiest way to lose the grant if you don't pay attention to their rules. Next one from Eves. Most of the time we have challenges of limited words, especially in background. How do we manage it to make it understandable and clear? That's one thing. You've got to learn to write with brevity. So same thing if you've heard about the term elevator pitch, where you basically have 3 to 5 minutes to talk about a project. So you might have to talk about the same project in an elevator pitch. That's 3 to 5 minutes. That's all you have. You got to put everything there. So it helps you to simmer it down to the essence of what's most important. Sometimes then you have a talk where you have 15 minutes to talk about the same thing. Then you expand it. Sometimes you have 20 minutes or an hour. Then you expand. So we have to learn how to quickly simmer down to what is important. And that is best done when you understand what you're doing and you can write and simmer it down. And it's a huge challenge for people. But then as you write more grants, you learn better how to be brief. There are some things you throw out that you really wish you could have added. But then you look at what you've kept and realize that what you've kept in that grant is more important than what you had to throw out, as much as you wanted to squeeze it in. So you have to be able to look at that. And sometimes what you want to put in a certain section can fit nicely in another section where you don't have as much of a limitation or where you are not saying as much. So you might put it there, but it has to also be relevant. So again, there's a lot of thinking about shifting and moving things to put things in relevant areas. And that is something you have to keep learning. Brevity. Sometimes the same sentence that will take 15 words, you can learn how to say it in 7 words and it will portray the same meaning. So it's also your wordsmithing, how you manage the use of words to put in your points. So sometimes it's not, I have to throw it out because it doesn't fit, but you have to restate the sentence to make it shorter, or you go and restate other sentences to make them shorter so that the sentence you want to put in will go in there. So again, grant writers also learn how to use the language in which they are writing. If I'm writing in English, then I have to be very, very, very good at constructing sentences in English. If I'm writing in French, if I'm writing it, whether you are writing Swahili or whatnot, you learn how to use that language well. So learning the language and how to manipulate it to portray your points. Very important question you're asking, actually. Is it a must to have prelim data from Kedri Abdallah? Is it a must to have prelim data for all applications? If so, how can early stage researchers be successful? So for early stage researchers, we don't put as much emphasis on the applications for prelim data as we do for, say, independent applications. But I will tell you that if someone comes in, also early stage, and has a very strong collection of preliminary data, you can't compete with them. You can't, because once you look at that, the reviewer looks at their application and sees how much prelim data they have versus yours that doesn't. You are, I'll think 9.5 times out of 10, they will preferentially fund the other project. So that's why you bring in mentors who have some of that preliminary data so that you can claim their preliminary data. But that's also how people plan writing their grants. They have a long game. They start preparing early so that by the time they get to write that grant, they've built some preliminary data. So there are some people who will write to me 3 months, even 3 months is generous, sometimes 1 month or 6 weeks before something is due, and say, could you be my mentor on this? And I'm like, one, I don't have a relationship with you in terms of a mentoring relationship. Two, we have not built anything together. So we don't have preliminary data together or even an abstract together. And three, you can't get all these done before. And so sometimes I tell people, wait another year, write maybe 2 papers or 3 papers. Let's do some things together before we go for this grant, because we are going in with passion for the question, but no preliminary data. You're not going to be very competitive. So, how much time does it take to ensure a good writing recipe? I'll say for an NIH R01 grant that has 12 research plan pages, I say a good 3 to 4 months minimum. Good 3 to 4 months. 6 months is where I'm comfortable. So these are not things, as I said, people will start inviting you 1 month, 2 months before to mentor them, or no. When you want to start writing, it's 3 to 4 months is especially when you are putting the team together and everything. If it's a team that has worked together for a long time, 3 to 4 months is more than enough. But when you are starting fairly new, 6 months minimum. Should the approach include detailed protocols? Yes, that's what it's for. It's the recipe, the detailed recipe. So the protocols and procedures for answering your research question is what is going to be. There are some thank yous. You're most welcome. How many references expected? There's no limitation to references. References are not counted in the word counts. Thank goodness. Because for some grants, I could have 60, 70, 100 references. So yeah, there's no limitation. Given the three, hold on. Let's see, can I use poster or conference paper to cite in preliminary studies? Absolutely, absolutely, especially when it hasn't been published, you can use that. Then let's scroll down a bit. Let me see. IHVN is doing well in their grant writing. Thank you. We've been doing this for a long time. I appreciate that. Some of us identified gaps in which to consider an application. When we do write one, can we send to review for review to your team before submission? That's if we are part of, and from Samuel, if we are part of the team, yes. We don't do this stuff for free. We have to be part of the team to do that. If you have mentors who may or may not be part of the team, they can review with you, because that would be their job. But these people we have to be working with you and collaborating to do that. If not, and IHVN is not relevant, then find the group that's working with you to write. They are your co-investigators are supposed to be your reviewers too. There are things you want your team to review and find out before the actual grant reviewers find out. That's the job they're doing. So when I'm working with somebody on a grant and I write some sections and I send out, and all you get back is, it looks fine, it looks good to me, that is a huge disservice. When you see people who keep doing that, who just say it looks fine, it looks good, that's a huge disservice, because it will not look fine to the reviewer. And so the people I appreciate are the people who are a little anal about things, a little obsessive compulsive, who will come and they will give you, this section, this, they will critique everything. I love that, because they allow you to pick out issues that you don't want to go unnoticed before they get in front of a reviewer. So the people who put in a lot and say a lot, even if some of it you think is too much, are the people I cherish, because they help you to improve your grant. So get people who review for you. Let's see. What is the difference between approach and activities? Approach is really your list of activities and how you are going to do them. So while you might call the whole section approach, what you are putting inside the approach is tasks and activities and how you are going to do them. So, and there's a question on what are some common mistakes applicants make when describing their approach. I did mention them. The biggest thing I see is lack of detail, especially in the measures. You said you are going to, I don't know, analyze a certain thing. For instance, say in an implementation science grant, you are going to measure sustainability. All right, as one of your outcomes. Okay, so we'll measure sustainability and make sure that the implementation of the intervention is sustained at the 5 sites or the 10 sites. Well, what tool are you using to measure sustainability? Okay, there is the tool. It has A, B, C, D, E sections. Well, how are you going to operationalize the tool into collecting data, and how are you going to analyze? Like, all of that has to be broken down. And especially implementation science, where we'll mention we are using this framework, say we are using the consolidated framework for implementation research. It's just a framework, fine. And then in your methods, you have not described how that framework is being used, broken down the domains, and to say this domain is defined as this. This is how we are going to measure. This domain is defined as this. You just mention it and say we are going to use this, and then for the rest of the grant, it disappears. So those are the issues: measures, definition of measures, and analyze and writing it down to the point of how are you going to operationalize this skill, and how is it scored, and how are you going to have your final answer. Those are the mistakes that people make. PIs ought to have a research team or ongoing research partnership prior to the grant to be able to submit preliminary work. Absolutely, absolutely, which is why you want to write a grant that's due. Today is November 4th, November 30th, and you are now writing people to be joining the team, or you are now inviting someone to help mentor you. No, 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 no. So think long. And that's the beauty about NIH grants. You can go into NIH website right now. You can see grants that are due not only this year, but next year, in 3 years' time. So you can actually look forward. And if you know a certain grant funder sends out a call for proposals every year or every 2 years, you can plan for those. Or you can simply be building up your research career. You can be writing papers and building work around a certain topic. And then when you are ready, you look at what you've already done and say, oh, I have plenty to write a grant, regardless of the funder. Okay, so, but having an ongoing research partnership, that's why being part of a consortium. And when they invite you, even if you're a research assistant and you're doing and you do your work well, and they keep you and you keep working with them, then you can leverage that consortium or that team. It's a wonderful thing, because you can claim their work as part of your preliminary work, and you can show that you've had an ongoing relationship with them. Does the statistician have to be in line with the grant in terms of career, or can it be a random statistician? Sometimes the thing is, sometimes statisticians become an afterthought. The investigative team, they might be epidemiologists or clinicians or other type of researchers. And then they say, okay, stats, we can't write it. Let's go and pick this person. It doesn't work that way. And while people bring in random statisticians, I like for the statisticians, same way as the health economists, to imbibe the study, to understand what we are doing. Because just packaging it and outsourcing to a statistician, a lot of times it doesn't work well. And so in studies where I may not be the PI and they have a statistician, we've been doing team meetings, you haven't seen the statistician yet, they are being kept to the side until we start generating data. No, because when you even start building your database for the study that you are now going to start, the statistician should be able to look at the database and understand what's going on. So I want the statistician to be there when we are writing the grant, when we are developing the ideas, and then for them to understand what is happening. And then they can write the stats plan and understand, for instance, if you are going to select a primary outcome measure, you can use different things. You can say, I will use retention, or we'll use drug uptake or testing up. You can use different things, but you have to understand where the basis of that information is coming from and which number or element to use for your primary outcome measure. And what do I mean by primary outcome measure? That is the outcome measure that the statistician is going to use to calculate your sample size. So bringing in random is not something I recommend, but I know it happens a lot. If you have to go find someone randomly because you didn't think about them from the beginning, that's fine. But having a statistician who understands and is there from the beginning is very helpful. NIH's current policies regarding use of AI. This is from Binyam Seifu. Many of us are non-native English speakers. We rely on AI to help paraphrase our work and remove and improve grammatical accuracy. Guidelines or restrictions about using AI in development of NIH proposals. Yes, they have made mention that they do not want AI to be used. And the language around AI is kind of general as far as NIH. I remember reading it maybe 2-3 weeks ago. I would say that then have somebody you can work with. Now you need to look at it in detail. And the other thing you can do when you decided to apply for an NIH grant is call the program officer. They want you to call them. Well, right now the Congress is U.S. government is shut down, so the NIH program officers are not communicating. But when it is open or if it is open, call the program officer, have a meeting with them. And whenever you're going to meet with the program officer, make sure that at least you have some specific aims drafted. Or if it's very early, tell them the reason for your meeting with them. And then you can ask them this question. They can give you more details about that. But if they say do not use AI, then do not, but work with people who maybe have a higher level of command of English who can work with you. So you can still draft and write, and then they can help edit. And sometimes that's the role that I also play in a lot of the grants that I work on, is making sure that we are free of grammatical errors and syntax errors and all of that. So, but great question, thank you. Given the 3 factors from Innocent Ali, given the 3 factors that enter the evaluation, how does factor 3 enter the overall impact score since it's only qualitative? I have not yet reviewed a grant, an NIH grant. I haven't reviewed any NIH grants this year because of the funding issues. I'm really focusing on writing grants, and it takes a long time to review grants. So I decided not to accept any grant review invitations this year because I'm just trying to keep my own head above water. So I have not yet reviewed the grant under the new guidelines. But the factor 3 being investigators and environment is now only sufficient or not sufficient. Because it's not scored, the other parts of the NIH grants that are not scored, even before this new recommendation. So it is not as strong, and unfortunately, you know, a lot of times, at least for the grants that I've written with other people, the investigators section score is usually fairly high because it's where you can, you know, pick and choose the best in the field to work with. But on the other hand, think about it for institutions like, you know, elite institutions in the US or UK who have, like, you know, Nobel Prize winners. nominees who are on these grants, a lot of times they skew the investigator score. So I think it makes it a fairer process for people who are not coming from high level, elite institutions, but who have investigators who know what they're doing. I think it helps to make things a bit more equitable. So it does minimize or almost entirely remove the importance of the investigator. But then now, instead of simply having your biosketch there, you have to now translate your expertise into the grant rather than simply someone looking at it and being impressed by your biosketch. You have to translate it into the grant. Should we hire statisticians? Some are working for money, not part of cohort. Oh yeah, I know that. What's the ethics here on these issues? There are some PIs I know who, if they are paying you beyond your salary, but if they are paying you on a contract for doing the work, they will not put you as part of the co-authorship. That's not how I operate. I think even if I'm paying someone specifically to do the stats work, they have done the work. I do include them in authorship, but they may not be the first author. The ethics there are many people who are paid, research assistants are paid, project coordinators are paid, the PIs are paid. Well, for some grants, some other grants I'm PI, but I'm not paid. But I think the paying is it's a appreciation and fair remuneration for their work. It doesn't mean you throw them out of the co-authorship. There are people who, for instance, are doing a study and they have to get a qualitative person. They give them a contract to do a specific job for a specific period of time, and they do not include them in the co-authorship. That's how they practice that. I personally don't do that because I also try to recognize people's work. What is the point of being a statistician when you've done all these analyses and you have nothing to show for it in terms of authorship? When you yourself, the statistician, are going to write your grant with other people, it's not there. And if you're a statistician who doesn't have a lot of publications or credited publications, for instance, for me, I might not bring you on board because when I'm doing a clinical trial and I have a statistician, I have the bio section and their bio sketch, I need to see that they've published. And if all the work they've done before, because it's for contract, they are not giving co-authorship, that's doing them a disservice because they can't prove that they are that good. They are not in the publication. So please give your statisticians co-authorship. And you can have a negotiation about co-authorship and pay. But honestly, you do yourself a disservice if you're a statistician and you take pay and you don't get co-authorship. Nobody knows whether your work is good because you don't have any publications. Can people with no PhD degree apply for NIH grants? Not as a PI. If you're a PI, you're expected to have a terminal degree, which would be PhD, MD, DPH, doctoral level degree, if you are going to be a principal investigator. To some degree, you can get away with having some master's level people as co-investigators, but generally it's still even looked at very critically if you're a key personnel. Unless, of course, you are bringing in someone as a community member who is a co-investigator, that is legitimate. But you can apply as a PI if you don't have a doctoral level degree. Yes, and I think I've answered all of them. And it's just about on the hour now. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Prof, for answering all of the questions. We are super thankful, and I would email my appreciation as well after the call. Yeah, so we will be going into the breakout room after this. So yeah, we are free to end the session now. Thank you so much.
And thank you. I want to say thank you to all and good luck with your endeavors. It's a hard time to be a researcher and to write grants, but I cannot retire and not have people doing the work after me. So please don't leave us hanging. We are looking to you guys as the future, or the current and the future. So thank you all for your efforts. Thank
All
you.
right. Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.